Chapter 3 of Through the Looking-Glass by Lewis Carroll. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3. Looking-Glass Insects. Of course, the first thing to do was to make a grand survey of the country she was going to travel through. It's something very like learning geography, thought Alice, as she stood on tiptoe, in hopes of being able to see a little further. Principal rivers, there are none. Principal mountains, I'm on the only one, but I don't think it's got any name. Principal towns, why, what are those creatures making honey down there? They can't be bees. Nobody ever saw bees a mile off, you know. And for some time she stood silent, watching one of them that was bustling about among the flowers, poking its proboscis into them, just as if it was a regular bee, thought Alice. However, this was anything but a regular bee. In fact, it was an elephant, as Alice soon found out, though the idea quite took her breath away at first. And what enormous flowers they must be, was her next idea. Something like cottages with the roofs taken off, and stalks put to them, and what quantities of honey they must make. I think I'll go down and— No, I won't just yet, she went on, checking herself just as she was beginning to run down the hill, and trying to find some excuse for turning shy so suddenly. It'll never do to go down among them without a good long branch to brush them away, and what fun it'll be when they ask me how I like my walk. I shall say, "Oh, I like it well enough." Here came the favourite little toss of the head. Only it was so dusty and hot, and the elephants did tease so. "I think I'll go down the other way," she said after a pause, "and perhaps I may visit the elephants later on. Besides, I do so want to get into the third square." So with this excuse she ran down the hill and jumped over the first of the 6 little brooks. "Tickets, please," said the guard, putting his head in at the window. In a moment everybody was holding out a ticket. They were about the same size as the people, and quite seemed to fill the carriage. "Now then, show your ticket, child," the guard went on, looking angrily at Alice. And a great many voices all said together, like the chorus of a song, thought Alice, "Don't keep him waiting, child. Why, his time is worth £1,000 a minute." "I'm afraid I haven't got one," Alice said in a frightened tone. "There wasn't a ticket office where I came from." And again the chorus of voices went on. "There wasn't room for one where she came from. The land there is worth £1,000 an inch." "Don't make excuses," said the guard. "You should have bought one from the engine driver." And once more the chorus of voices went on with, "The man that drives the engine. Why, the smoke alone is worth £1,000 a puff." Alice thought to herself, "Then there's no use in speaking." The voices didn't join in this time, as she hadn't spoken, but to her great surprise they all thought in chorus. I hope you understand what thinking in chorus means, for I must confess that I don't. Better say nothing at all. Language is worth £1,000 a word. All this time the guard was looking at her, first through a telescope, then through a microscope, and then through an opera glass. At last he said, "You're travelling the wrong way," and shut up the window and went away. "So young a child," said the gentleman sitting opposite to her. He was dressed in white paper. "Ought to know which way she's going, even if she doesn't know her own name." A goat that was sitting next to the gentleman in white shut his eyes and said in a loud voice, "She ought to know her way to the ticket office, even if she doesn't know her alphabet." There was a beetle sitting next to the goat. It was a very queer carriage full of passengers altogether. And, as the rule seemed to be that they should all speak in turn, he went on with, "She'll have to go back from here as luggage." Alice couldn't see who was sitting beyond the beetle, but a hoarse voice spoke next. "Change engines," it said, and was obliged to leave off. "It sounds like a horse," Alice thought to herself, and an extremely small voice, close to her ear, said, "You might make a joke on that, something about horse and horse, you know." Then a very gentle voice in the distance said, "She must be labelled Lass, with care, you know." And after that other voices went on. "What a number of people there are in the carriage," thought Alice, saying, "She must go by post, as she's got a head on her. She must be sent as a message by the telegraph. She must draw the train herself the rest of the way," and so on. But the gentleman dressed in white paper leaned forwards and whispered in her ear, "Never mind what they all say, my dear, but take a return ticket every time the train stops." "Indeed I shan't," Alice said rather impatiently. "I don't belong to this railway journey at all. I was in a wood just now, and I wish I could get back there." "You might make a joke on that," said the little voice close to her ear. "Something about you would if you could, you know." "Don't tease so," said Alice, looking about in vain to see where the voice came from. "If you're so anxious to have a joke made, why don't you make one yourself?" The little voice sighed deeply. It was very unhappy, evidently, and Alice would have said something pitying to comfort it, if it would only sigh like other people, she thought. But this was such a wonderfully small sigh that she wouldn't have heard it at all if it hadn't come quite close to her ear. The consequence of this was that it tickled her ear very much, and quite took off her thoughts from the unhappiness of the poor little creature. "I know you are a friend," the little voice went on, "a dear friend, and an old friend, and you won't hurt me, though I am an insect." "What kind of insect?" Alice inquired a little anxiously. What she really wanted to know was whether it could sting or not, but she thought this wouldn't be quite a civil question to ask. "What, then you don't—" the little voice began, when it was drowned by a shrill scream from the engine, and everybody jumped up in alarm, Alice among the rest. The horse, who had put his head out of the window, quietly drew it in, and said, "It's only a brook we have to jump over." Everybody seemed satisfied with this, though Alice felt a little nervous at the idea of trains jumping at all. "However, it'll take us into the fourth square, that's some comfort," she said to herself. In another moment she felt the carriage rise straight up into the air, and in her fright she caught at the thing nearest to her hand, which happened to be the goat's beard. But the beard seemed to melt away as she touched it, and she found herself sitting quietly under a tree, while the gnat, for that was the insect she had been talking to, was balancing itself on a twig just over her head, and fanning her with its wings. It certainly was a very large gnat, about the size of a chicken, Alice thought. Still, she couldn't feel nervous with it, after they had been talking together so long. "Then you don't like all insects?" the gnat went on, as quietly as if nothing had happened. "I like them when they can talk," Alice said. "None of them ever talk where I come from." "What sort of insects do you rejoice in where you come from?" the gnat inquired. "I don't rejoice in insects at all," Alice explained, "because I'm rather afraid of them, at least the large kinds, but I can tell you the names of some of them." "Of course they answer to their names," the gnat remarked carelessly. "I never knew them to do it." "What's the use of their having names," the gnat said, "if they won't answer to them?" "No use to them," said Alice, "but it's useful to the people who name them, I suppose. If not, why do things have names at all?" "I can't say," the gnat replied. "Further on, in the wood down there, they've got no names. However, go on with your list of insects. You're wasting time." "Well, there's the horsefly," Alice began, counting off the names on her fingers. "All right," said the gnat. "Halfway up that bush you'll see a rocking horse fly, if you look. It's made entirely of wood, and gets about by swinging itself from branch to branch." "What does it live on?" Alice asked with great curiosity. "Sap and sawdust," said the gnat, Go on